Hi there, welcome to the eCommerce Nurse podcast, our 5th episode. I'm Karina McLeod, ex-Amazonian consultant and founder of eCommerce Nurse and Vendor Society. Today we're going to be talking about the growing private labels on Amazon and whether big brands are at risk of losing market share to these newly evolving brands. We have a special guest, Travis Rudolph. Travis is a founder of Trek Strategy, which is a strategy consulting firm that helps manufacturers transition their existing businesses into the e-commerce channel. Travis has a passion for brands, retail, and an unparalleled expertise of how Amazon works and what makes them tick. He has spent over 20 years in retail, working for industry-leading brands, Netgear and Nestle. So welcome, Travis. Thank you for coming on the show. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Karina. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the discussion.
Great. So we're going to be talking more about big brands, and you've got a lot of experience with working with those larger industry-leading brands. And with Amazon making it easy these days for businesses to actually launch new brands, smaller brands, and with Far East sourcing becoming more accessible, private labels are evolving rapidly. They're starting to gain market share within those industries. But should the bigger brands, the industry leaders, be concerned, and are their businesses at risk?
And I think I would say first, we should probably define private label because the private labels have been around for a very long time. And when you look at grocery as an example, when you look at any grocery store, over time as a category within grocery developed, it was inevitable that private labels would form. Usually, though, those private labels were under the banner of the retailer. And I think what's interesting about Amazon is that not only do you have private labels developing on Amazon as Amazon and other manufacturers and sellers figure out where those opportunities lie as categories become or as categories grow and become more mature. But then you also have a host of smaller brands that I would lump into the risk for bigger brands that they have to deal with. So in other words, not only as a bigger manufacturer or a bigger brand, do you have to contend with the host of private labels that Amazon is launching on their own platform. You're also dealing with smaller brands that are taking advantage of the opportunities that Amazon allows for you to be successful in a category. So to answer your question, I would absolutely be concerned if I were a bigger brand in a category on Amazon. Now, the reality is that most private labels don't succeed long term, right? But some of them do, and some of those private labels, or I would say smaller brands, disrupt the market. And Amazon really provides a platform that rewards those nimble, smaller companies in a way that other retailers or e-tailers in history have not. The problem with most established brands that I find in the U.S. are that they're not nimble, right? They fight tooth and nail with Amazon in terms of agreements. In a lot of ways, they try to put up barriers, mostly because they either don't want to be doing business with Amazon, or they see Amazon as a threat to their current business model, or there's a lot of unfounded fears in terms of doing business with Amazon. And to top it all off, most of those bigger brands really aren't profitable for Amazon in the end, right? But the consumer doesn't really care about the woes of these brands and the fighting with Amazon. They just want to buy things online. Convenience and selection are becoming more and more important than the brand in some categories. I mean, think about your own shopping habits online. How many times have you purchased a smaller brand simply because those bigger brands aren't there, or because they're not offering prime shipping, or because they don't have enough inventory, or because, there's a lot of reasons why you might buy a brand that you've never heard of before simply because it has 4.5 stars and you've come to trust Amazon's platform to communicate to you the quality of a product. But if the big brands don't watch out as the market shifts their brand will become obsolete over time.
That's an interesting point that you raise. I mean, in some categories, how the brand isn't necessarily as important, and actually customers trust buying on Amazon, and it's almost that the reviews are the major factor for, as opposed to, oh, well, I know that brand. It's like, well, this is trusted because it's got 4.5-star reviews. And I guess with bigger brands, there's it's not necessarily arrogance, but they've been well known in the industry for a long period of time. But if that, with that shift, they can, some of them no longer rely on that brand name.
Right. And you see a lot of denial, right? And so going back to kind of my company and what I specialize in, because it's one, it's easy to say e-commerce strategy. Well, what does that really mean? And I by no means am an expert in everything that entails, right? Where I tend to specialize in, because of my past and because of my experience working for large to mid-sized manufacturers, I know the plight of these manufacturers and dealing with Amazon. And so I tend to resonate well with the bigger brands and their fears, and really helping them to understand, how to engage Amazon in a way that still fits with their brand strategy. And so that I kind of speak coming from that experience when I talk about things. And I would say that one of the things I see most common with the bigger brands is it's a combination of kind of denial, like Amazon's never going to be able to figure out my industry, right? Or Amazon, or I'm going to somehow be able to control the growth of e-commerce in my category, right? And I would say that's I wouldn't say that's arrogance. I would just say that's a little bit misinformed.
Yeah, definitely. That's interesting. But I mean, with that, then we've spoken a bit about the bigger brands. You've also got these private labels, and as you said, the smaller companies. But are you seeing more and more private labels evolving? So we're definitely seeing it on Amazon overall, but just, if we look at bricks and mortar and retail in general, are you seeing more private labels evolving? And what's really a key factor to that?
Well, Amazon has created thousands of subcategories worth millions of dollars each. And in a lot of cases, there are no dominant or known brands represented within these categories and subcategories. I mean, I spend a lot of my week, a lot of my day researching these categories to understand market size, to understand where the opportunities lie, and where the gaps are in Amazon's own assortment on behalf of my clients. And so there are literally thousands upon thousands of opportunities. And so I think the tools that are available today to understand those opportunities are there, no matter if you're Procter & Gamble or you're a 5-person startup. You can see the opportunities. They're right in front of you. You have a real-time 24 hours a day view into what's happening within these categories, and there are low barriers to entry, so you can get in and you can compete. So, and that's very alluring to a lot of small businesses. And in addition to that, these 5-person startups, and that's just an example, or even 100-person companies that have an idea, that have access to manufacturing, that have expertise when it comes to, how do you be successful on Amazon? They can launch a product in 6 months, and they can establish dominance in a subcategory simply by because they understand how Amazon works. They're not tied to an existing channel or existing agreements, right? And they can come in within 6 months, make millions of dollars, and choose to either evolve and continue competing, or even step out if they want to, if the opportunity goes away, right? They can do all of that before an established manufacturer can make even the simplest of adjustments to their model. So it's incredibly lucrative with a low cost of entry for brands that know what they're doing. And then I think, and this is one of the keys also, it's all self-service now. right? Even 5 years ago, in a lot of cases, you still had to approach the retail group at Amazon, and you had to, really, the information was sort of more closely guarded or not as easily available. All right, but now there's no buyer preventing you from getting on the shelf, or big manufacturers blocking you from getting a share of voice to the consumer. And I also find these new younger brands are super focused on the consumer experience. And when you look at a lot of these bigger brands, and I can't tell you how many times I have this conversation. When you talk to a bigger brand and you talk about the customer, without even thinking about it, they define the customer as the channel.
Interesting.
It's the distributor, right? Or it's the buyer at the retail location, or it's, some other, that's their customer.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with Amazon, that's not your customer anymore. Your customer is the consumer, the person who's actually consuming the goods. And when you think about the nuance between dealing with a consumer versus dealing with a customer, it requires an entirely different set of processes within your company to deal with that customer, those differences. Right. And so these newer brands, these younger brands, these private labels or smaller labels, right, are super focused on the consumer experience, which is one of the reasons they can step in right away. And they understand, hey, I've got to have a 98% seller rating. I need to be responding to reviews. I need to be taking consumer feedback into, as a process, into the process of my company, and react to that. And so from that perspective, they're light years ahead of some of these mature brands.
And that's a really great point. And actually something I've never really thought about is how with the consumer and the end consumer, because even if you are a manufacturer and you're dealing with Amazon and you're a vendor, so effectively Amazon is the customer, you still have to have your end to consumer hat on, that you can't just say, well, we're selling it to Amazon as a vendor, Amazon then deals with it, Amazon will sell it. You still need to be focusing on the end consumer. And that's a really interesting point that you've made in terms of that the private labels and these newly evolving brands have the customer at the forefront of their mind. And that is definitely the way Amazon is at customer centric, and they've built their success has been built on that.
Right. It's a different way of going to market. Yeah. And it takes big companies that have, hundreds of people in each department. And these are all very capable people, but it takes a long time for the light bulb to come on to realize that, okay, wow, my customer is different now. And I still need to think of my distributor as a customer, but now I need to develop a set of processes for actually dealing with a consumer feedback as opposed to a distributor feedback. Because if you think about it, a distributor, isn't going to ask the same questions, right? So if I'm selling my product to a distributor, I'm thinking about certain things, right? I'm thinking about, okay, well, what's the cost to ship? I'm thinking about what's the product. I need to sell the specs, right? I need to sell the features of the product. I need to provide sell sheets. I need to provide spiffs so that those distributor reps can make money when they sell my product to the end user. So you're thinking, the set of thoughts and processes in your mind when you're selling to a distributor is an entirely different set of thinking than when you're selling to a consumer. And I see this all the time. It actually comes out in if we zoom, super far into the Amazon experience, it comes out in the bullets, and you'll see this when you shop, right? There are the company that hasn't quite grasped the fact that they're selling to a consumer. In their bullet points on their detail page, they're going to list out product spec.
Yeah.
And I think the companies that have really figured out I'm selling to a consumer, they're going to list out consumer benefits. How does this product benefit me? And they've had to rewrite that, most likely, as part of their marketing communication.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of just, really interesting point you make about the content, because we've definitely we've definitely seen that. And as you say, some of these newly evolving brands, their content is great. It's very coherent. It's very consumer friendly. And it's just looking at exactly what the customer wants to hear, looking at the product reviews and everything, and really understanding how the customer speaks and how they should speak to the customer. That's really interesting. One point you did make earlier, which was an interesting point, was how some of these, private labels don't succeed. Or another interesting point is that I guess there's that short-term opportunity where it's like they jump on something, it's a hit. It might only be for a hit for a few years, and it works well for them, and then they move on to something else.
Yeah, and getting back to what you're saying about these labels or smaller brands and why they may not be successful, and even Amazon sees this. So Amazon Basics, or Amazon's many other private labels, they've launched products into categories and not seen success. And a lot of times that's simply because they think they understand the product, or they think they understand the consumer, and they see opportunities, so they launch a product basically copying something else, and then oftentimes competing on price or competing on availability or selection. But they skip over or they miss certain components. And one that's very common is customer support or technical support. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes they will underestimate the cost of technical support. They'll underestimate the knowledge base that they need to have in order to support customers. And then, so the customer buys a private label product and it looks just like the other one from the brand that they know, and then they install it and they have an issue, and then they call that private label's customer support, and they can't get the support they need. Mm-hmm. So they send it back, they write a bad review, and so a lot of times what I see is private labels not truly understanding the market, not truly understanding the opportunity, how to price a product, and what's really required to support that product. And so that's where they fail. In the case of the private label that makes a product and then it lasts only 6 months or 9 months and then they get out, sometimes that's because they're hopping on a trend, and probably diet would be the example that comes to mind. They hop on a diet trend, they write a book or they produce, some products, some consumable products or something for that diet trend. And then the market changes and then it goes away and the opportunity goes away. So there's lots of reasons why you see private labels come and go on Amazon. And sometimes it's hard to even know were they successful or not, depending on, because they have their own set of metrics that they're using to be. But certainly the opportunity to get in, take advantage of an opportunity and get out is, Amazon's providing a way like no one has before.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I guess the other thing, in sort of an advantage, though, I guess with manufacturers is they've been in the retail industry for years, and it may be that they're new to e-commerce and they're more bricks and mortar based, but they have been working within retail. And some of these newly evolving brands may not have had that retail experience, but just solely have understood how to master Amazon. And I guess that sort of comes into like your point, as in they sort of can underestimate the amount of after sales support that's required when selling a product on Amazon. And then there can be a lot of focus on how to master the algorithm and how to appear and rank in search results and sort of the stuff that needs to be done on Amazon, but the other parts can be missing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's something to be said for a company that has survived, for 50 years or longer by navigating and optimizing and taking advantage of all the channels that are available to you. That certainly is going to obviously give you a set of experiences that is going to help you be successful on Amazon. Clearly you have the infrastructure, you've got the capital, you've got the experience with, consumer trends, and you've been through the highs and you've been through the lows. And so I still think that, long-standing manufacturers, I would say, still have the advantage in terms of being successful long-term on Amazon versus a smaller label or a private label It's just they have so many things to overcome, oftentimes, to structure an Amazon business that doesn't affect or hurt their existing business.
Yeah, you've got years and years of experience of what's worked and what hasn't worked, and on not just sort of on Amazon, but I guess the main thing here is off Amazon as well. I mean, the conversation, would you say, I mean, you're chatting a lot with these larger brands. Are you seeing that they are changing their processes and are simplifying things so they can move as quick as some of these newly evolving brands on Amazon?
I rarely find a company that will say, I don't want to do business with Amazon. It's usually not that type of conversation. The conversation is usually, I know that I need to engage with Amazon. I just don't know how. Mm-hmm. And I've heard from other brands or people that I know that work in my industry, all of these horror stories of working with Amazon. So I might be afraid. I'm afraid to do business with Amazon. How are they going to, with my existing channel, I have relationships with those buyers. I know it's comfortable for me. I know that those buyers or those retailers or those distributors, they want a relationship. They want to work with me. And then I've heard that Amazon, isn't that way. And so most of the time it's not that they don't want to work with Amazon, because they clearly, any business out there, right, can see the revenue opportunities. It's that they don't know how to engage, or they've heard the horror stories and they have the fears, and they don't know how to navigate those. And they need somebody to kind of help them say, okay, that's a legitimate fear, right? That's a legitimate risk, or that's not a legitimate fear. Or, if you build your business this way, for example, if you engage with the marketplace organization versus the retail organization, right? Here are the pros and cons of that. And once you're able to explain those things, then companies can start to visualize how they can engage with Amazon and still achieve their own goals, or still keep intact their brand strategy.
Yeah, definitely. And there are horror stories out there, I guess, and you can understand, because the way of working, and as myself as an ex-Amazon vendor manager, I remember the days of dealing with manufacturers where they were so used to, and are so used to dealing with buyers and being able to pick up the phone and speak with a buyer, or arrange a face-to-face meeting and know them very well. And then when it comes to dealing with Amazon, if they actually get a vendor manager assigned to their account, that vendor manager isn't there, or if they are there, the relationship is just completely different. And the relationship is not, yes, it's first name terms, but it's very different. It's not about spending a year developing a rapport with that individual. It's more about, what do we need to do to get results?
Right. And then you may have 3 conversations with that vendor manager, and then you get a new one, right? I mean, so there's not a lot of continuity. And then the whole process of self-management or self-service, even for organization. And I was in charge of an Amazon business for a large manufacturer. And I remember when we had to shift from working with brand specialists to working simply on a ticket-based system. And I had a very good team, and there was a lot of adjustment there, right? Mm-hmm. So they were already good at dealing with Amazon, but then it was like, okay, now I got to write a ticket for everything I want to do, and we got a lot of pushback. So I can understand the giant chasm between the traditional way of working with the buyer, and then if I want to change a bullet point on a detail page, I've got to cut a ticket. And it may or may not be done right, or that person, that's responding to me is in some other country, and I know that I'm never going to talk to them again. Or, it's a completely different way of working, and that is that can be a very scary thing.
Yeah, definitely. And we've spoken a bit about private labels, newly evolving brands, but of course, Amazon is investing heavily in their own brands. And Amazon yes, they could be jumping on some products whilst those products are they're going through a fashion or it's a fad, but also they seem to be growing brands that they want to have longevity, that are going to be there long term. Would you say that these own brands that Amazon is developing could be more of a threat to these larger brands?
Well, I think they can be, and I've worked with the private label teams within Amazon, both on U.S. soil and then also out of their Netherlands group. And so I worked with them for about a year and a half. So I know a little bit about their motives and their method of operation. I would say that the private label groups, and there's probably more categories than just this, but I think they're certainly looking at two things. One, they're looking at established businesses where margin is present, and the product is relatively simple, and so there's a low risk of negative customer feedback. Mm-hmm. And they see an opportunity to come in and make 10 points of margin or 15 points of margin based on the prices in the category. But I also think they're looking at this. Take home furnishings as an example, where Amazon has launched several private labels in that space. That, I think, was more out of necessity. I think they were looking at, and probably engaging with several manufacturers in that space who didn't want to offer selection on Amazon. So they said, okay, well, we need to grow home furnishings and we can't get any manufacturers to work with us, so we're going to create our own brands. And I think from my experience, I've seen those two reasons as the most common reasons for Amazon to develop a private label.
And that's an interesting point, because as one of Amazon's focus is always on selection. And so, if there's if there is a selection gap and there aren't any vendors willing to work with them, and there's that gap there that it naturally makes sense for them to go and source it themselves. And I know still a number of businesses, or I guess even the smaller businesses, get nervous with that as well, because Amazon can be very competitive on prices, and they know how to give that positive customer experience, and they almost know how to work their business in their favor. And I guess it's not only a threat to those larger brands, but I guess is it a threat to all the brands that are just trying to succeed on Amazon?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, right? Which is, if let's say I'm an aspiring brand or an aspiring private label, and I see Amazon's already in the category, what do I do? And I think, you actually outlined the points, which is think about what Amazon's really good at. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean that they're good at everything, right? I would say if you have some sort of a unique category or product knowledge, and then you can also, reliably supply the product, variant of the product that consumers are looking for, or some other factor, right? Then I personally wouldn't necessarily be afraid to compete with Amazon Basics. Let's use that as an example. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily be afraid to compete with that. If you feel like if you look at your strengths and weaknesses, you look at Amazon's strengths and weaknesses, and you say, you know what, there's a gap for me here. There's an opportunity for me here. Because Amazon is, for all that they are, and as many things that they're good at, they are not looking to necessarily come in and develop 47 varieties of something. In most cases, they're looking at developing, the four or five products that have the most traction in the space or in the category. It doesn't mean they want to develop a full line of products or get into the business of supplying every need. And so I think there's still opportunities. I would certainly be more cautious about entering a category where Amazon has a private label. I would certainly do my due diligence because they are obviously going to compete well, as you said, on price, on availability. They're going to do that well. But that doesn't mean that there's not still an opportunity.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you've raised there, as in, yeah, we know what Amazon's very good at, but actually, do you have something unique that you believe in your product that you can shout about, that actually you can go ahead and compete with Amazon as well, which is interesting. And I guess that leads me on to another question. In with private labels and the bigger brands, is what would you say is the recipe for successful private labels, and what does a bigger brand need to do to defend itself against one of those?
That's a great question. I think as a private label, I think obviously you need to do your research and you need to understand what the opportunity is. Do you have either the product knowledge or the market knowledge or the category knowledge to develop a product and compete? And do you have the capital to, do you have the capital to build the inventory and be prepared for the ups and downs of that category, right? Understand the seasonality of it, be prepared there. But then, obviously understanding as much as you can Amazon's algorithms when it comes to searchability, and successfully launching products on site and taking advantage of all of the let me say that a different way. Taking advantage of all of the different delivery mechanisms to get your product in front of customers that Amazon offers, such as, paid search, as an example, promotions, lightning deals, coupons. Are you doing your SEO properly? Are you conquesting category terms? Do you have capital for that? So, I would be thinking about all those things, but probably, very importantly is also having a plan B, right? So develop your strategy, what you want to do, what is it worth, but then also have a plan B. What if these things go wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What if the pricing in the category shifts? Can I withstand the changes that may happen? And is it still worth it to me at that point? And just have a plan B, I think, would be most important. And then have a plan. Either have an exit strategy,
Mm-hmm.
or have a strategy for growth. It's funny. I was buying. What did I buy the other day? I bought something on Amazon, and as I was thinking about preparing for this conversation, and we use the word private label a lot. And I was thinking, well, this label, I've never seen it anywhere outside of Amazon, but I've bought so many products from them that I don't even consider them a private label anymore. They're just one of the brands that I buy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this was a brand that started out making, something, and then they saw, they had the opportunity. They executed their strategy flawlessly. Just on Amazon, and then they continue to build out their product lines. And so now they have a very successful, smaller business on Amazon, and I wouldn't even consider them a private label. I would just consider them a brand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess, but there's one thing that you mentioned a few times is capital, and I guess that can be a challenge sometimes. So for smaller evolving brands is having capital, because there's capital that's already locked in inventory, and then there's the need to pay for paid search, and it's how aggressive you want to be or can be. Whereas manufacturers almost have that advantage where they do have that capital and can battle more when it comes down to, for example, sponsored ads, and be more aggressive. So could that then be more of a challenge, that small private labels, if they start to grow, that they're going to end up with a wall where they need to invest in more inventory, they need more capital, but then their capital is locked in paying for the current items to sell in sponsored ads and running promotions, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's part of the business plan, and I by no means am an expert when it comes to startups or smaller businesses that are trying to raise capital. But know that, first of all, I'm not an expert in that area, but I would say that as part of your business plan, I think you've got to have thought through. What happened. Run out of capital, right? Because you don't want to commit the cardinal sin of creating all this demand and then stocking out on a product line for 3 months.
Yeah.
While you're waiting for capital to arrive so that you can go purchase more inventory from the OEM. So I think you have to think through that, right? And I think, and this is not a shameless plug for our business, but you want to talk to somebody that can help. Like if you're not confident in your business plan, then I would go out and I would hire somebody or talk to somebody that can help you see around the corner or see the gaps in your plan, right? And I would try as best as I can to properly estimate the capital needed, but then also have a backup plan. If things go really, really well, right? Let's just say the demand is 3 times what you thought it was going to be, but you don't have the capital to buy the inventory you need to stay in stock. Think through that and have a backup plan. Have secondary sources of capital.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is launch a business, see it be extremely successful, and then not be able to keep the product in stock. Because then you lose, as you lose all that momentum. You lose search relevance. You lose search ranking. And by the time you get back in stock, you have to invest as much, if not more, to try to regain your status within the category.
Yeah, exactly. No, those some good tips there, definitely, in terms of really it's all down to planning and, it's not just having the magic product to sell on Amazon. It's about planning a business strategy, as in once you've got that growth where you are developing those sales, do you have enough capital to invest in more? And do you have enough capital to invest in all the different things, buttons that you need to press in order to really succeed on Amazon? So that's great. And I guess before signing off, we've spoken of you've been able to give some great tips on smaller private labels. Do you have one tip that you would give to a big brand when it comes to ensuring that they're competing with Amazon's own brand and these newly evolving private labels on Amazon?
Yeah, I would. I'd say, if I were talking to a big brand right now, I would just say you're out of time. If you don't have a working strategy for e-commerce right now, get one and get started. Stop saying that it's not going to happen to me, or it won't happen in my industry, or it won't happen in my category. Because one of the biggest companies in the world with endless resources and an appetite for losing money is trying to figure out how to change your industry while you continue to deny the threat.
Yeah, and that's great advice, very good advice, because that's it. Time is up, and as we say, these private labels have all the tools. They're finding all these little areas where they can gain market share. So definitely a fantastic tip. And you've shared some really great information and just about your experience, and it's great to have you on the show sharing that with everyone. And I'm sure those listening will also find today's podcast very valuable. So thank you ever so much, Travis, for being an amazing guest today and sharing that experience. And I hope to have another conversation with you soon about retail or other things relating to e-commerce.
Sure, I would love to. And I just hope that, whoever's listening, whether you're a big brand or a private seller, you could take something from that and learn something from that. And I hope it was helpful. And that's what I'm here to do.
Great. Thank you, Travis, ever so much.
Thank you.